And Judy, now I cannot see you. There you are. Are you ready to get started? Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for being here with us today. We are excited to have you. We're excited for this conversation. It is an important conversation, and I think we have lots of goodies for you to be thinking about and unpacking. So, for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Rebekah Paré from Paré Consulting. I'm joined by my colleague, Judy Anderson. She's our phenomenal senior consultant here and a wonderful partner in our work. And we're here and excited to talk to you over this next hour about a topic that's becoming increasingly important across higher education, which is this idea of a career strategy in an accountability era. Right? We're definitely in a new era. For years, career outcomes occupied an interesting space in higher education. Everyone agreed they were important, right? But few treated them as urgent. And that's changing. So today, institutions are increasingly being evaluated not only on access, retention, graduation rates, but also on what happens after students leave campus, right? So we're hearing a lot more talk about employment, earnings, economic mobility, workforce readiness, return on investment, right? And whether we agree with all of these developments, I'm sure we all have opinions in this space. I know you all. They are really shaping how higher education is being judged by policymakers, by boards, students, families, employers, and so on. Okay, so today we have a robust agenda for you. We're going to talk about what's changing at the federal level. We're going to talk to you about what's happening in the states, some really important shifts, and how these shifts are influencing student and parent expectations, why this is creating a new opportunity for you all as career leaders, why many institutions are kind of struggling to respond to this, and then really what it means to move into a career ecosystem. But before we jump into our policy landscape, I'm curious, I'd love to know which of these statements best reflects your institution today. Please go ahead and throw it in the chat. So career outcomes are a strategic priority on our campus. That's A. B, interest in career outcomes is growing. So we're hearing more conversations about this. We're being asked more questions. C, we're starting to feel some external pressure. The heat is turning up. D, we're mostly reacting to individual requests and initiatives. Or E, just like not sure yet. What are we seeing here? Some A's and B's. All right, all over. Okay. We've got quite a spectrum. Judy, what do you think? What is the most common answer we're seeing here?
It's a little hard to track. It's all over the
Hard. I think
place,
kind of
which
like
is,
A and B, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Someone
mean,
said A through D, all of the above.
yes. Haha, a little bit of everything. Nice. Okay, so what's notable, is that these responses really do represent different stages of the same journey. Okay, some institutions are already having strategic conversations about outcomes. Others are just beginning to feel pressure from students, parents, boards, policymakers, right? Some are still responding to individual requests rather than approaching career outcomes as a strategy. So as we go through today's conversation, I want to encourage you to think about these trends here, right? And how they're likely to move your institution from one category to the next, as you see here on your screen. Okay, so I might keep that in mind. Judy, I'm going to pop it over to you. Would you help introduce us to the shifting accountability landscape?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. So, one thing I wanted to emphasize today is that none of these developments have happened overnight. What we're seeing is the culmination of more than a decade of growing concern about the value proposition of higher education. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Families are asking harder questions, legislators are asking harder questions, boards are asking harder questions, and increasingly those questions revolve around outcomes, not simply whether students graduate, but what happens after graduation. So the result is this steady movement towards greater transparency, stronger informed college choice, and greater accountability around career outcomes. So a real quick poll, this is an easy one. How many of you have ever looked at the college scorecard? I'm raising my hand, but in the chat, just put a quick yes or no. How many of you have gone out to the college scorecard and looked at it? Lots of yeses, that's good. Not recently, okay. Yeah, it's changing, right? The level of information is changing as the years kind of go by. So I'm seeing some no's in the chat. That's helpful. It's helpful to know, and I think it's really important that you're kind of thinking, you're right, it doesn't cover Canadian institutions. This is really based in the United States, US government, federal government. So the college scorecard was originally intended as a transparency tool. Students and families can compare institutions based on cost, debt, graduation rates, and post-graduation earnings. What's particularly noteworthy is that the data now includes both institution level and program level earnings information. So a prospective student can compare not only colleges, but also by fields of study, which is an interesting level of detail. That's a very different level of transparency than most institutions have historically faced. What makes this significant isn't just the data, it's the audience. The audience is prospective students and parents. Admissions professionals are telling us that families are increasingly using these comparisons as part of their college search process. They're even downloading the raw data sets for comparison, which I found really interesting. Being a parent of two college graduates and a current college student, I've never downloaded data, but that is what parents are starting to do as they dig deep into this information.
Yeah, and I think this is so important because institutions, I think, still think of career outcomes as data that maybe just shows up in board meetings or accreditation reports, but increasingly it's showing up in our enrollment conversations. And the same families who were once asking about the quality of the mattress in the residence halls are now asking about internships, employment rates, skills, return on investment.
So this takes us to a slightly adjacent topic, financial value transparency and the FAFSA. So we're also seeing this earnings data show up in new places. For example, lower earnings disclosures have appeared within the FAFSA process itself just this past year. In other words, students don't need to visit the college scorecard anymore. The information is being inserted directly into the college selection process and in the applications for financial aid. So students get a notice if a major at a school they're considering doesn't meet the threshold for federal financial aid as part of their application for student aid.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, you know, whether a student changes their decision now because of that disclosure, I mean, first of all, that's real and that's happening. But it also almost doesn't matter because what matters is that the question is now being asked, right? So what we're hearing now from the United States federal government that's effectively saying you should consider career outcomes when choosing a college, right? And that's a very different environment than we were operating in, I would say, even 10 years ago.
So what's even happening next week? This new shift is moving now towards earning-based accountability. So this is really significant. Beginning on July 1st, which is what, 12 days away, the federal government will begin using IRS and Social Security wage data to evaluate educational value. Academic programs, like at the level of a major, that repeatedly fail earnings thresholds may ultimately lose access. The students who want to major in those areas would lose access to federal financial aid. So what makes this different from many previous accountability efforts is that institutions are not reporting the data themselves. The federal government is matching educational records with IRS and Social Security earnings data to determine whether programs meet earning thresholds.
That's really important. I think a lot of questions that I get from career services leaders are really about our first destination survey responses, right? Are those the data that we need to be able to share upwards? And that is not the case. The federal government is not looking at your data that you're producing. It is going to take its own. And whether, we agree or not, whether your institutions agree or not with the methodology, right, of using this earnings data as a metric, the signal is pretty clear, right? Earnings are increasingly being used as a proxy of value. And I don't think this is going to reverse anytime soon.
I don't really think so either. And I think what we're also seeing is a broader movement. We're seeing organizations like Carnegie, Lumina, and Strata all emphasizing economic mobility and post-graduation outcomes. And overall, I think this is a really good thing. I think as practitioners, this is something that we all align with and agree with. So, but thinking about this, historically institutional prestige, think, for example, about Carnegie's institutional classification system, was often discussed in terms of selectivity, research activity, or graduation rates. Now we're seeing an increase in discussions about access, mobility, and post-graduation outcomes. Different organizations, different motivations, but a very similar direction. Career outcomes are moving closer to the center of how institutional effectiveness is being evaluated. One example, you can take a look at this map here that Rebekah will put up in a second, and look at the state that you're from. I know if you're from Canada, you're not going to find yourself on this map, but you can see the impact of these organizations like Strata. So they're moving towards this evaluation of state efforts towards providing clear outcomes. So having at the state level, an investment in providing clear outcomes data to parents and students of those states. So take a look here. It might be a little bit small for you, but where is your state on this map? Are you leading in this area? Are you in the advanced stage? Are you developing, or are you foundational? And I've been watching this trend for a while, and I can tell you states are actively moving from foundational to developing to advanced. This map looked very different even a year ago as states start to invest. So here's what else we're watching. And this is interesting. This is right now something that is being moved through different committees at the federal level in Congress. And it's called the College Transparency Act, which would essentially establish a national post-secondary student data system. So the details may evolve with this, but the trend is unmistakable, right? The federal government is saying we need to create a consistent one way of doing this across all 50 states. So we're looking at more outcomes data, more visibility, and more transparency.
This actually, thinking about data, transparency in data and data reporting, is a really good transition to what's happening at the state level. Because in many ways, in state policy is where we're seeing a lot of really interesting activity. So let me move us into that space. So I think when people think about accountability, lately, I think we've been talking a lot about federal policy, especially with this new earnings metric that's coming online. But increasingly, states are becoming major drivers of change, and they're approaching workforce development in a few different ways. So we're seeing incentives for schools tied to workforce needs. We're seeing expansion of work-based learning. And we're also seeing, again, greater focus on outcomes and the data collection of these outcomes. So we're going to talk about each of these. So I want to give you a few examples of what we're seeing across some of the states. We're not talking about all your states, but we're going to talk about a few of them that we've been working with recently. So we have in Ohio, Virginia, Louisiana, Colorado, Florida, Indiana as examples, right? There are many other states that are working on these. We're seeing that policymakers are moving beyond just simply funding higher education, right? Or meet your some basic metrics to shaping expectations about workforce preparation and post-graduation outcomes. The approaches vary. So we see Ohio moving toward requiring students to complete an internship or a comparable applied learning experience before graduation, right? State policy, not institutional. Virginia has invested heavily in statewide work-based learning infrastructure, as well as employer engagement connected to that infrastructure. Colorado is a good example of a school that has included an incentive. They have a career connected campus designation that recognizes institutions who are systematically embedding career connected learning throughout the student experience. And if you want to check that out, you can find that information online on what they are requiring for that designation. It is a steep climb to get that designation. We're seeing policymakers in Florida propose measures that would hold programs more accountable for employment and earnings outcomes. And Indiana is tying program viability and public investment more directly to graduate earnings with program consolidation. We're starting to see a lot more in the news about program consolidation to align with workforce needs. And then Louisiana, they've got a number of things coming down the pike. We're waiting for some major decisions there at that state level, but at the moment, they're piloting work-based learning requirements across the institution statewide. So these policies all differ in their design, but they are all pointing in the same direction, right? So we have career-connected learning is no longer being viewed as an optional enhancement, right? Or maybe just a responsibility delegated solely to career centers. Increasingly, state governments are signaling that workforce preparation, applied learning, and career outcomes are core institutional responsibilities. And what's striking is that these policies are no longer limited to just traditional workforce programs, right? We've seen more of this at the community college level, but now we're seeing them affect liberal arts institutions, private institutions, regional public institutions, flagship institutions, right? Career-connected learning is increasingly being positioned as part of the value proposition of higher education itself. So again, these policies are impacting actually in quite many cases, all schools in the state. Doesn't matter if you're public or private, okay? It doesn't matter if you're flagship or regional.
Well, and as the way I think about it is that I find it interesting that these initiatives don't just affect institutions that are directly subject to the policy or the incentive, right? They affect the competitive environment. They're impacting enrollment, which we all know is really, really critical because students are comparing institutions, parents are comparing institutions, boards are comparing institutions. So going back to that first poll and considering what stage your institution might be in terms of career outcomes, and many of you were answering like A and B, kind of ahead of the curve. Here's something to think about. Your peers may be evolving their career ecosystem as a result of these new state accountability changes, while your institution may be standing still or maybe just making micro changes. So even institutions outside states where accountability is heightening often feel the ripple effects because, as we all know, students cross state lines to attend college, right? So our institutions reside within a particular state environment where particular policies or initiatives, whether it's by the governor, state legislature, or other types of things that are happening, are impacting it, but we're attracting students from all around us, right?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about, right? What the impact is then on your enrollment when your neighboring states are requiring these things. And we just gave you a few examples, but we're noticing that there are many conversations happening in a lot of states. So just out of curiosity, here's another poll for you. What best describes your state right now? Right? So workforce and earnings accountability policies are already in place, right? Maybe B, state mandated work-based learning or internship initiatives are underway. C, you're aware that policies may be discussed. D, no significant activity that I am aware of. And that's the case at some institutions. I mean, some states, there's not much going on. Or E, I'm just not sure. And it's okay if you're not sure. This is why we're raising this issue. Okay, so we have I'm seeing some not sure yet. Some things may be underway. Yeah. And some of these policies I find until they're turned into law are kind of difficult to know where they're at. where they're at in their legislative process. And we're noticing that a lot of different parties are involved in this, right? It can be your state higher education department, it could be your governor's office, it can be your legislators who are working on this. And so that adds to the complication of being aware of even what's happening. But here's where I'd like us to shift gears because look, the real story isn't just policy. The real story is that we have some changing expectations and we have increasing competition. And this creates a tremendous, tremendous opportunity for career leaders and for those of you who are working with them, right? So many of our campus leaders, our presidents and provosts, they're consumed with immediate pressures, right? They're really focusing on their revenue, enrollments, budgets, research funding, AI policies. Sound familiar, anyone? Right? Political uncertainty in the last couple of years, right? Our career leaders are often among the few people actually who are paying attention to these longer term workforce trends, right? So I want you to realize that you sit in a particular place where you're much more aware of some of the things that are happening around you than maybe sometimes your institutional leaders are focused on, because some of these other issues they're working on are pretty great in terms of size, right? I wouldn't want to be university president today. Just I'm going to put that on the record. Judy's shaking her head. No way. All right. So how about for our next poll? What do you feel like the greatest urgency right now on your campus is? What are you hearing more about? Enrollment, return on investment, how we articulate that, policy changes at the state level. Maybe your board is really invested in this work. Outcomes, not sure what's creating the greatest urgency. Everything, all of the above. I didn't put that as an option. Gerald, yes, I'm reading your mind. Yeah, a lot about enrollment. Look at that. Enrollment, ROI, some on outcomes. Yep. Yep. People are adding budget.
Enrollment is not synonymous with budget in my mind, right?
Enrollment
Budgets
is your
are driven.
revenue. Yeah, exactly. It's your revenue.
Okay.
All right. This is a lot. So I'm noticing that not that many of you selected E. Yeah. Career outcomes rarely appear at the top of these lists. And what's interesting is that they increasingly sit right underneath all of these items, right? They sit right underneath enrollment, as we just talked about, right? Students and their parents are much more savvy and asking harder questions about career in order to consider enrolling, right? Our ROI, so much of the ROI conversation right now is what our graduates are doing after they leave our campus. Board expectations, boards are really cued into this. They're watching the labor market. They know what's going on. They're running organizations where this is being impacted. And then retention. I mean, we could talk for a whole nother hour at least, I think, about the connection between career and what we're doing in the classroom and with students, particularly early on, to support them wanting to stay here on campus. So all of these conversations eventually lead back to questions about these student outcomes and institutional value. So that's important because you all are uniquely positioned to connect the dots, right? That's what I started to say before. You understand student engagement. You understand what employers are asking for. You're working actively in experiential learning, in graduate outcomes, in career technologies, dealing with workforce trends and the ways in which those are shifting and the labor market shifts, right? These are many of the ingredients needed to respond to these pressures that they already sit within your field of vision, right? That means you have the opportunity to be a strategic translator on your campus. But the accountability isn't the question isn't whether your accountability is increasing, because we know it certainly is, right? But the question is whether your institutions are organized to respond effectively to these changes.
I think when institutions recognize these pressures, they often respond, Rebekah. I think we're seeing this over and over with like a new initiative, right? A new mentoring program, an internship initiative. They buy a new platform, or they set. How many of you have been on a task force, right? You get put on a task force. It's that knee-jerk kind of response, or maybe not quite knee-jerk, but
I literally was on a call this morning with a provost who said, I think we're going to launch an internship initiative. I swear. I swear I did not cue her up for that. I did not even tell her about this workshop today, but we're hearing it all the time. We're hearing it all the time. And frankly, none of these initiatives are bad initiatives. All of these initiatives are useful in some way, shape, or form, usually, right? But the problem is that accountability, when we're talking about this level of accountability at the federal and state levels, it rarely exposes a program problem, right? It actually exposes a systems problem. So career outcomes don't emerge from just one office, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? You just like say, preach, Rebekah. I know, right? It just, this stuff does, our work cannot just come from the Career Center. It has to emerge from a collection of experiences that occur across that journey, right? I'm going to say this again, that our career outcomes do not emerge from just one office, right? They emerge from a collection of experiences that occur across the journey. That's why so many institutions are working very hard and still feeling frustrated.
Is this sounding familiar to any of you? I'm not sure. I know from my background, it's a little bit familiar because as we work with other institutions across the country, we are seeing these patterns. Career services is expected to improve outcomes, but career services doesn't control the curriculum or advising or experiential learning or employer partnerships happening elsewhere on campus outside of your offices if you run a career center, or alumni engagement or enrollment messaging. I'm seeing some clapping hands floating across my screen and some thumbs up. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I'm looking, Gerald saying too, we do not need more programs. We need investment visions and strategies.
Yes.
That is absolutely
Oh, that's
right.
great, Carol. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, right? So the institutions want to come to you, right? Come to the career centers asking you to solve a problem that you don't own, right? And that's where these initiatives. So we need more internships. We need to count the internships. We need students to engage earlier. Students complain about the career center. We need you to do more. We need better outcomes. We need more faculty to participate and buy in, right? We need better data. But I mean, like, let's step back and ask for a minute. Who owns this larger system? Do you? How do all the pieces fit together? And what would it actually take to coordinate them?
Yeah, I think the reality is that many institutions don't actually have a career preparation problem, right? There's lots of people on campus who have expertise in career preparation, but they do have a coordination problem. And the challenge is that coordination problems are often invisible. Students experience them, but they don't necessarily know what's causing them because a student might receive career guidance in one office. Experiential learning, though, if you want that, you go to another office. Employer connections, well, that might be at your department. It might be in the alumni association. It might be elsewhere. And alumni networking, that happens through a completely separate channel. So each of these pieces may work well on its own for a very specific group of students or specific goal. But from a student's perspective, it can feel very, very disconnected. And I want to really highlight this. And for other students, they may never encounter career support at all. And I think that's really important. I know it's something that all of us are talking about, right? Those issues of how do we provide career support for all students? Because equity in all of this is front and center.
And I think when you think about this, right, and you think about that student experience and how uneven it may be, you're being judged on this. Your office and your institutions now think about this accountability and what's being asked. Your institutions are being judged on the cumulative result of all of these experiences. And so you can see why an internship initiative or a mentorship initiative or whatever may just be a band-aid, right? Another, piece of duct tape, chicken wire, bubble gum, right? To kind of pull these things together.
Yeah, I think, Rebekah, that expectations that are being placed on career services have just expanded dramatically. There might be some little snapping in the background, right? And it's often being done informally, right? But it feels like a mandate. I think to many of you, expectations are rising, the pressure is on, but you're not formally being asked to solve the problem, but you still feel like you're being given a mandate.
And this raises another important question, right? Do we have a system capable of producing outcomes at scale? Because that's fundamentally different from asking whether we have a career center or an internship initiative, right? So many of you know what I'm talking about when I talk about a career ecosystem, right? A career ecosystem is the system that can produce outcomes at scale when done right. Right. So when we use the phrase career ecosystem, we're talking about all of the people, processes, partnerships, technologies, and experiences that influence those career outcomes together. Right. Career centers are a key part of that system. So, are your partners across academic and student affairs, advancement, enrollment, as well as your external partners, like alumni and employers, like all of these folks are part of this system, right? We're talking about how are we coordinating all of that?
And I don't think it's just coordination, right? Most campuses already have all these components. We know that they do. The challenge is that they're rarely designed to function together intentionally through shared infrastructure and governance to improve career outcomes. So this new era of accountability is exposing gaps in how we're currently structured to deliver on the promise that most of our institutions make to students and their families. So I'm really curious about this one actually, which statement feels most true on your campus? A, career preparation is highly coordinated across units. B, we have strong programs but limited coordination. C, responsibility is shared but ownership is unclear. And D, we are actively trying to improve coordination. I'm trying to get back to my chat here, Rebekah. Oh, here it is. Okay, hold on. Let me see. Rebekah, are you seeing a lot of C's and B's?
D's, lots of C's and D's.
I mean, they're not like a report card. C's
yeah,
and D's.
This is That's true. Yeah, not a
that didn't
report
sound
card,
very
folks.
good. That y'all have C's and D's, but I think it is indicative of where we are in this evolution, right? Of thinking about the centricity of career support and what's required. Yeah, this is interesting. I'm not seeing really any A's.
I don't think
Did I
I've seen
miss
an
any?
A.
Yeah, I don't think I have either. I think B is really common. C, I think would be interesting to dig into. This is where when we're working with different campuses, there's a lot of conversation about who has decision rights, right? Or where is the ownership? Who really gets to decide about systems and who has to participate, those types of things. So that's interesting. Yeah. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing where you're at. One of the things that we've been noticing over the last several years is that institutions tend to focus on visible symptoms, right? You know what I'm talking about when I say like, oh, we don't have enough internships. That was my conversation this morning with that provost. We have low student engagement. We have weak employer participation. We have limited faculty buy-in. We don't have the right technology. I had one person say to me, we just need an AI technology so that I can say something about it. Right? So people are motivated by a lot of different things, data challenges, right? But those symptoms often have deeper causes. And I think what we're trying to get at here is like, it's worth your while to understand what those deeper causes are, particularly in this accountability era. So what we've done is we have actually designed something called the Career Design Blueprint, which is based on our consulting practice and the themes that we keep seeing emerging frequently. And the blueprint, we're going to introduce it to you today, examines 6 domains that influence an institution's ability to prepare students for life after graduation. And it doesn't just look at what programs you offer, but how the entire ecosystem functions. And here it is. You're the first folks that are really seeing this broadly. So thank you for being here. But you can see these are the 6 domains. We have authority and governance at the top. Who owns your career strategy? We have the coordination and operating model. How is career preparation organized and aligned across your units? There's the learning architecture and career preparation, right? The heart of what we do. What are students systematically experiencing in terms of their career learning, right? Who reinforces and extends that learning? That's the multipliers in our strategic partnerships, right? Then we have the strategic execution and adaptive capacity. Can your institution prioritize, execute, measure, and improve over time? And then there's the Career Center, right? In many ways, the Career Center is the engine for this model, right? Is the central delivery engine designed to execute the framework with sophistication and sustainability.
What we're finding is that institutions are often really surprised by where their challenges actually reside based on these domains. And I think that these domains can be really helpful to you as well as you think about how your ecosystem actually functions. And as you kind of take a look at this model, and maybe you're thinking, okay, this makes some sense to me. We wanted to actually offer you the opportunity this summer. We're excited about this blueprint, and we're launching a two-part workshop series built around the blueprint coming up here in July. And it's designed for leaders who find themselves asking questions like, why are our career efforts not gaining traction? Why does progress feel slower than it should? Why do good initiatives struggle to scale? That's a really good question, right? A lot of good programs are happening, but how do you actually launch them to scale? Why do we keep having the same conversations year after year? And how do we create a more coordinated institutional approach? So if those questions feel familiar, that's exactly what we'll be exploring together this summer. One of the biggest challenges we see is that institutional leaders often know something isn't working, but they are not entirely sure why it's not working. And the blueprint helps make these patterns more visible by providing a diagnostic approach to looking at the design of the ecosystem more holistically, and provides a framework to alleviate institutional pain points in response to today's accountability era.
Yes, I mean, it's ultimately, right, the goal is not simply to respond to just the accountability pressures, it's to build an institution that's really better positioned to support students, right? To demonstrate that value, to achieve stronger outcomes over the long term. So I should mention that, this is open for individuals, but we do think that it could be really valuable to bring campus teams to this if this is something that you're interested in. It will help, I think, you start to socialize and create some shared awareness about what it actually takes to execute a career ecosystem well, and will give you the shared language for talking about strategy. So I think this could be really beneficial for you to really begin kind of pushing the envelope on your campuses. And again, right, today we have laid out for you a whole architecture for how you can start to really make the case for change on your institutions. And, I noticed in the chat, even one person was saying, right, we would like to even just be asked the question about what we think about the work that's happening, right? And so I think the ground that we've covered today on federal accountability, on state policy, on these changing expectations, on the competitive pressures, and on the importance of the institutional design in order to be able to respond effectively to this changing landscape. I think this is important information that you can then take back to your campus and start to articulate maybe a better case for them to change, to listen, right? So at this point, we'd love to open it up. We'd love to hear from you what questions, reactions, observations are coming up as you think about your own campus. And thank you for allowing us to introduce, this new blueprint to you today. But again, this is set up not as a webinar, but as a regular meeting. So if you want to maybe raise your hand, we'd be happy to call on you if you have a question, or feel free to throw it in the chat. But if you'd like to speak, to ask your question live, please, you're welcome to do that. So what questions are coming up for you? Gerald.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I can't be on camera at the moment, but thank you for the sessions. Rebekah and Judith, curious from your perspective, if you can share a little bit more, how may we work with our campuses to shape perhaps the cabinet or even the president's office in really directing these messages up to the trustees? Because oftentimes we see a disconnect, there's a pressure kind of doing all these work, president trying to kind of drive those ideas, but then the trustees are not necessarily coordinating it or even thinking about or knowing what it is that have to be done. So I'm curious if you can provide some guidance on maybe key points that we can direct back up to the president's office and say, here are a couple of points that maybe the trustees might care about that can help drive this system to actually make it into not just a program, like I mentioned earlier, but really an investment and intentional strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, Gerald, I think this is a really great question. I mean, I think thinking about making a case to your institutional leaders, to your board, the thing that's going to resonate the most is whatever it is that they're finding most urgent, right? And we saw from the list today that so many people are really talking about enrollment, right? This is about your revenue, your bottom line income as an institution. It is really, really important that they stabilize that, because some schools are really hemorrhaging students right now. So I think I would say understanding what it is that your particular campus is really motivated about right now. So if it is enrollment, then what did all of these things that we just talked about today, how is that impacting and potentially impacting enrollment, right? So I think what you want to show is that there's a pattern of behavior now at the federal and state level that is going to increase your competition. And if you're not doing anything about it, right, I think that creates some real challenge. The issue, I do think, Gerald, right, and knowing a little bit about your campus from our work together, I think a little bit too about how there's a lot of different stakeholders that all have a lot to say about this, right? Especially board members are kind of like experts on everything, including career and workforce, right? So we kind of are trying to balance that. But I think what we want to try to do is create the urgency and the solution. And the gap here is that institutions don't understand what it takes to create an ecosystem. They just don't. And so I see Cortez has a question about what institutions are really like crushing it in the career ecosystem space. I'll be curious to hear what people say about that. But like, I think we tend to do this Band-Aid approach, right? The internship initiative is just something flashy, but it's not going to be supported with an infrastructure that's going to turn the outcomes around that you want, right? And so really understanding in your case, right, your president really wants to make a difference for students. That is not going to make a difference for students. Plugging away at something like, and I'm not saying that you're doing an internship initiative, but plugging away at something like an internship initiative is not going to fix all the problems. I mean, we have data we have seen with institutions, and I just spoke about this at NACE, right? Internships don't equal great career outcomes for all students in all campuses. So that is not going to be the be all and end all, right? So I think thinking through, again, what is your institution really struggling with right now? How can you help educate them around some of the areas that around the federal and state policy that are going to be impacting your peers and impacting your institution potentially directly, right? And how that's changing the landscape of accountability, and that accountability, to really do accountability right, we need to think more systemically than local solutions. So I'm going to say that. I'm going to stop repeating myself and turn it over to Judy and see if she wants to add anything.
Well, I think it's a nice segue into Cortez's question, right? Are we seeing any institutions really doing this extremely well? I mean, I think this is just the beginning of transformation in higher education and in this space. I think this isn't a new conversation, right? We've been talking about this for 10 years, the words career ecosystem, career everywhere, all those types of things, but we haven't really been talking about what it's going to take to design the system that supports it all. Right. And that's like a shift in the conversation to say, how do you actually create the infrastructure, the governance, the partnerships intentionally with shared decision rights, right? In some cases. And I think that's where a lot of career offices have made great attempts at this, but ultimately they're not situated in the institutions with that type of oversight maybe given to them. So I think we're just on the front edge of this, is what I would say. There's a lot of great career work happening out there in a lot of different spaces, but a truly designed career ecosystem is rare.
Yeah. I would agree. And I'll be honest, like this is why we're doing this workshop. I mean, we're keeping the price pretty much as low as we can possibly keep it in order to get the word out. But I think part of the reason why we're doing this is to help build awareness, right? Like bring your supervisors, bring some of your institutional leaders to something like this where they can also hear how this disconnect is happening. I do recognize that sometimes we say these things on our campuses and they are just not heard in the same way, right? I used to be a career center director myself, Judy also, right? So we have been in that same these same circles, and we're just not heard the same as sometimes an external voice is heard. And so I'm not trying to plug like always bringing in an external voice, but sometimes that is heard a little bit differently. And Cortez, yes, we are recording this. I will share this out. And so this is something that, if you want to circulate, you're more than welcome to do so. I think there is a huge disconnect that is pervasive on our campuses, and we see it every day, which is that career outcomes is a career center issue, right? And so our institutional leaders default to what they know. They default to their own background and their personal experiences and their educational experiences. They don't think of this as a system. And I think what we're trying to get the word out about is actually what it takes to implement this is a more coherent strategy and system that expands across the institution. And I know so many of you know this. I don't think I am saying anything that is like super new to you, because I know many of you are working with your faculty, many of you are working with your employers, your board members, your alumni, right? You're trying to push into all of these spaces. But unfortunately, I think the pattern is that we're kind of doing one initiative here, one class presentation here, right? It is not systemic. And so really thinking about what could that institutional strategy look like to support that is a different level conversation. And it's a more challenging conversation, to be clear.
I want to address Laura's question about whether there's a website or an organization that's kind of keeping track of these trends nationally and at the state level. I don't know that I could say that there's any one. Like, we're reading a lot of things. I would point you to Strata though, because they're publishing some materials that really go state by state by state, and they're highlighting examples from different states of changes, especially related to quality coaching and work-based learning and those types of things. So if you're going to have to pick one or you don't have a lot of time, I would say follow them and follow their publications. Would you add any others, Rebekah?
Well, I was going to say the there's like an American Association of Boards, governing boards, like AAGB, I think, or AGB for short. Sometimes you see some inventories there. We've been doing a lot of work, right? Like handpicking through institutional policies and just really trying to keep apprised of the changes that are happening. Sometimes you'll see a flash in the Chronicle. But I put my website here, our website in the chat, and I do have a newsletter. So if you have not signed up for my newsletter, please, feel free to do so. It's up to you. It's a weekly newsletter where I focus on career strategy, and I do bring these types of issues into the fold. As a matter of fact, I just wrote about this very topic just a couple of weeks ago. So I continue to try to raise awareness about these things. I know how busy you all are. I remember being in your shoes and just feeling like I was running all the time. And so I'm trying to leverage this newsletter to keep you informed. And so that could be a place to support some of that work. Oh, Valerie, thank you. I work hard to make this good. So yeah. Yeah, thank you, Laura. Any other questions? We have another few minutes. No? Okay. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you for attending today. We'd love to see you. We have more sessions coming up. Not just the blueprint. We have a free webinar coming up next month. So we would love to have you join us at that session if you'd like. And meanwhile, I wish you a great summer. If there's anything that we can do, Judy or I, to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks,
really
everybody.
Appreciated having you. Thank you.